So the kids who were at Cyprus yesterday morning will forgive me, but this story has to be told twice. It's about a mother. Actually, two mothers. There might have been a third mother involved. We do not know the gender of the third. I'm sitting in the kitchen. The dogs are in the kitchen. I don't know what I was doing, checking email, something. And I hear a noise outside. Now, those of you who don't know, we live in the country. We have a farm. I hear chickens. Chickens make noise all the time. I heard chicken noise. Whatever, they're always making noise. And then I heard another sound. It was a cat. The dogs heard it. They jumped up and barked. I heard it, and I said, that sounds like a cat fight. We're not supposed to have that. So the dogs and I jumped up and raced for the door. I opened the door. The dogs went right. I looked left. And I saw an eagle flying up. And I called the dogs, but I was ahead of them already. And I went over to where the eagle had flown up from, and there were feathers on the ground, chicken feathers. So I'm looking at this eagle as he's flying away, looking to see a big fat hen in the eagle's talons. I couldn't see any bird. Maybe I was at the wrong angle. I watched, and either that eagle was, holding that chicken up under here, or he didn't have the chicken. And then I looked, and there was a chicken walking away in the garden, kind of shaking itself and looking huffy and and then I saw something else. Walking toward the house from the same spot was somebody else, shaking herself, annoyed and bothered. It was a cat. But not just any cat. This was Mama Cat. Now, I may be making this up, and if I am, oh well. But if you knew Mama Cat, you'd make up the same story. I'm figuring that eagle got down there and grabbed that chicken, and about the time he grabbed that chicken, Mama Cat jumped out and said, "You drop that chicken right now." And the eagle was so astonished at this little cat telling him what to do that he dropped the hen and flew off. I don't know. Might have happened that way. It's the way I tell the story. I'm intrigued because I've seen cats do a few things like that, like chasing off 200-pound dogs and things like this. Sometimes Mama Cat does what's right without regard to its prospects for success, without regard for her own safety. She does it because it's right. I think that kind of boldness was something of what Jesus was trying to inspire in the last blessing he pronounced at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are those who are persecuted for doing right. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who are so committed to doing right, to speaking the truth, that even if they're this big and the eagle is this big, you get in the eagle's face when it's doing wrong and you say, "Drop that hen." And you don't know if it'll drop the hen and pick you up, but you speak because it's the right thing to do. I mean, this is part of the very fabric of Christianity, this commitment to doing right. You know, not weighing the consequences, but doing the right thing. Growing up, Martin Luther was one of my great heroes because he stood up. And I knew his story first from reading it in Ellen White's book, The Great Controversy. And here she talks about how this monk, you know, he had all kinds of psychological and spiritual problems, but he found some answers in Scripture that worked for him. And then he began to share it with his classes. And pretty soon he's sharing it with most of Europe. And people were finding themselves set free from the authority of the church, the tyrannical authority of the church. And no human system, not even the church, likes it when somebody messes with their authority. So Martin Luther was a marked man. The Pope said, "You're a bad guy, we're going to get you." And in those days, you know, the Bishop of Rome he was kind of the king of Europe. He could get what he wanted. And everybody figured it was a matter of time before Martin Luther's grabbed and burned at the stake. But then the Emperor Charles V pulled a surprise move. He called a big council together to make a final decision in regard to Martin Luther. We're going to have to try the man. That in itself was already precedent-setting. What do you mean try him? We've already announced he's guilty. No, we're going to have a trial. So Luther is summoned to this great big council. I love it. You're going to like this, Gabe. The name of this thing was the Diet of Worms. Doesn't that sound lovely? Now, diet did not mean something to eat. It meant a council. And Worms was in Germany, so they don't pronounce it worms. It's Worms or something like that. Anyway, so Luther is summoned to this big council. All his friends beg him not to go. His enemies don't figure he'll dare show up. Everybody figures if he goes, he'll get into town, he won't get out, not alive. But the emperor had given him a safe conduct. Said, if you come to your trial, we'll let you go back home before we do anything else. And Martin Luther wasn't going to be intimidated. He was a young, brash, bold guy. So he goes. And there he is, gathered before this vast assembly, the brightest minds, the most powerful political figures. 1,000 people perhaps gathered in this room. Martin Luther is right down front, right in front of the emperor. And they had a stack of books there. And the prosecutor said, "Sir Martin," I doubt they called him that, but anyway, "Sir Martin, 2 questions. Are these your books? Did you write them? And will you take it back?" So Martin said, well, the first question's easy to answer. Yep, those are mine, I wrote them. Second question, that's pretty weighty. Give me a day. I said, okay, you got a day to think about it. See you tomorrow. He comes in the next day, and everybody figures, why did he need a day? I mean, he knew this was coming. I mean, they figure he's just buying a little time, and he'll buckle. I mean, he's smart. He doesn't want to die. So they call him in the next day and said, okay, what's your answer? Do you take it back? Do you retract? Do you recant? Well, to begin with, he gave them a sophisticated, careful answer. I mean, it was truthful, but it was, it was long. The prosecutor, wait. Yes or no? Up or down? Then I love this. I'm going to read this, if you will allow me. It's a little long. These people back in those days, they wrote long books. They made long speeches, even when they were saying, no! You got it. Sometimes that is the righteous answer. Here's Luther's thing. Since your most serene majesty and your high mightinesses, isn't that cool? Don't you love the way they talk? Since you require from me a clear, simple, precise answer, I will give you one. Let's forget Luther. Modern paraphrase. I will not and I cannot retract, recant, take it back. I wrote those books because I believed it was true. I still believe it. He has a couple of lines in there. He said, if I'm going to make myself subordinate, my mind and my conscience, subordinate to the popes and the councils, would you please explain to me which one of those I'm to be subordinate to? Because they argue with one another and they disagree with one another. That's a pretty good line of thinking. But his reasoning, in my opinion, is in some ways less important than his statement. I will not, I cannot. I don't care who you are. Other stories in the book about the reformers did not end so happily. John Huss had a similar engagement with councils, and they burned him at the stake. They would have burned Luther if they could have caught him. But he was protected by powerful people, and unfortunately lived long enough to show that he was as fallible as the people he was opposing. Martin Luther went on to practice severe persecution against anybody who disagreed with him. Beware. We celebrate, as we should, as Protestants, the courage of the people in the late Middle Ages, coming into the Reformation period, the people who had the courage to stand up against an oppressive church system. But every one of those reformers that Ellen White talks about in her book, Great Controversy, turned around and mirrored exactly the persecuting power that they had felt before. Now, there was a group of people who did not, but they're not in that book. Jesus said, blessed are those who are so committed to doing right, they will endure persecution. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. God can't do his job on earth without people like that. God needs some people who, as my friend back there said, can say no to authority. Blessed are those who are persecuted for doing right, for speaking truth. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, if you think for a minute, Martin Luther was opposing the visible institutional form of Christianity that had been around for 1,500 years. He was going against bright theologians and church leaders. Let's be clear. Sometimes to do the work of God, you must oppose the church. And notice I didn't put a name in front of the church. All churches occasionally need the voice of a prophet, like Jeremiah. Who was Jeremiah opposing? We read in our Old Testament reading here, Jeremiah's out there preaching, and the church people grabbed him and they were going to kill him. Now, who were the church people? They were the people of God. They were the priests and nobility of the nation that God had picked as his own. We now say Jeremiah was right. We, who are proper religious people, say that Jeremiah was right. That's only because we're later in history. If Jeremiah was standing here today, we'd be going, throw the bum out. At least that would be the temptation, because he was disrupting the status quo. Blessed are those who are persecuted for doing right. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Let's apply this fairly specifically. In our congregation, we have a lot of people who are involved in the medical field. One of my good friends, superlative doctor. He works in a field, at least according to the way he describes it, this field of medicine is probably where you have the greatest overlap of dealing with the mind and dealing with the body. It's messy. It's complicated. I cannot imagine it. And he's been sued 3 times, I think. It goes with the field. Now, I know this guy, and I'm laughing. I'm going, you got insurance. You know you did the right thing. Anybody who was looking for a doctor would look for you first if they knew you. The people who were suing him were people who were on the mind side of that mind-body problem thing. But it eats him. His wife talks about it. It just eats him. All of you who work in the medical field know, you run the risk. Doing your job, doing right by your patients, you run the risk of being sued for doing the right thing. And Jesus' word to you is if you're doing the right thing and you get sued, even if you lose the suit, even if the whole world says you were doing wrong, if you were doing right, hear the words of Jesus. God is watching, and you are blessed for having the courage to minister in a field that has that kind of liability. Blessings. Blessings to you. There are people here who are scientists. In secular settings, devout Christian scientists sometimes can get beat up, figuratively, by making known their devout Christian piety. Sometimes, in today's world, faculty can be persecuted for being too overt with their Christianity. It's equally true that if you're a scientist working in an Adventist school or a conservative Christian school, especially if you're dealing with earth science, if you say what you think, if you say what the preponderance of the evidence says, you can be persecuted. If you are speaking out of your commitment to truth, no matter what the world, defined in a narrow sense, your little world, the larger world, if you are speaking the truth to the best of your ability, hear the words of God. Blessed are those who speak the truth, even if it gets them into trouble. And I would add, woe to those who think persecution can create truth or even preserve it. We actually have it pretty easy here in the U.S. I was just reading, in February of this year, in Saudi Arabia, 53 Ethiopians were arrested for having a private prayer meeting in a home. In Saudi Arabia, it's illegal to have a prayer meeting. It's illegal to have a Bible. It's illegal to practice your Christian faith in any way. In 1997, Saudi Arabia executed 2 Filipinos who became Christians in prison. They'd been criminals. They were in jail not for their faith, but in jail they met Christ. They had a conversion experience. And then they wouldn't shut up about it. They were executed simply for talking about Jesus. We got it pretty easy, folks. You can say almost anything you want to, and people might laugh at you. You might get fired. You won't get killed. Not here. But just because we have it easy is no reason for us to become lazy. And I want to challenge those of you, especially those of you who are young. There is work in this world that must be done. And it can only be done if you have the guts, if you've got the courage to do right and to speak the truth, even if it goes counter to those with power and authority. The world needs fixing. The world needs mending. There's great work to be done. And almost always, great work requires someone to go against the status quo. So I challenge you, especially those of you who are young. Let Martin Luther's example, and if that's too remote, too distant, let Mama Cat's example inspire you. Do right. Speak the truth. And know that even if the world disapproves, God smiles and says to you, blessed. My kingdom is made up of people like you.